Second only to his passion for architecture and landscape design was a love of the theater, which again was quite characteristic of Virginians. He had seen his first known theatrical production at age 19 on a trip with his older brother to Barbados. It was the first and only time Washington had ever been beyond American shores, and the place where he was strongly attacked by smallpox. Later, at Williamsburg, as a member of the Virginia legislature, he had attended the theater regularly. During a visit to Annapolis, he recorded going to the play 4 nights out of 5. In New York later, he attended the theater 7 times and saw his first production of Hamlet. But of all the theatrical productions he had seen, it was Cato, by the English author Joseph Addison, the most popular play of the time, that Washington loved best. One line in particular he was to think of or quote frequently in his role now as Commander-in-Chief. "'Tis not in mortals to command success, but we'll do more, Sempronius, we'll deserve it." Though Washington was often said to be the richest man in America, he probably did not rank among the 10 richest. He was very wealthy nonetheless, and in large part because of his marriage to Martha Custis. His wealth was in land, upwards of 54,000 acres, including some 8,000 acres at Mount Vernon, another 4,000 acres in Virginia's Dismal Swamp, nearly all of which he had acquired for speculation. In addition, he owned more than 100 slaves, another measure of great wealth, whose labors made possible his whole way of life. In a popular English novel of the day, The Expedition of Humphrey Clinker, Tobias Smollett wrote that to be a country gentleman, one was obliged to keep horses, hounds, carriages, with suitable numbers of servants, and maintain an elegant table for the entertainment of his neighbors. It could have been a description of life at Mount Vernon, with the difference that the servants were black slaves. Among the Virginia gentry who had taken up fox hunting with an exuberance no less than to be found on the country estates of England, Washington stood out. Thomas Jefferson considered him the best horseman of his age. That Washington was known to hunt up to 7 hours straight, riding as close to the hounds as possible, leaping fences and going extremely quick, and always to the end to be in on the kill, was considered not only a measure of his love of the chase and his exceptional physical stamina, but also of his uncommon, unrelenting determination. Billy Lee, the body servant, rode with him, rode like the wind by all accounts, and no less fearlessly than his master. Found a fox in Mr. Phil Alexander's island which was lost after a chase of 7 hours, Washington recorded in his diary at the end of a winter day in 1772. But he did not give up, as shown in his entry for the day following. Found a fox in the same place again, which was killed at the end of 6 hours. An English sporting writer of a later era would describe fox hunting as the image of war, without its guilt and only half its danger. In some years, according to Washington's own records, the days he devoted to fox hunting added up to a month. He kept precise account of exactly how long each chase lasted, to the minute. Again, he was a man who loved precision in everything. Stories were told of extraordinary feats of strength, how, for example, Washington had thrown a stone from the bed of a stream to the top of Virginia's famous Natural Bridge, a height of 215 feet. The Philadelphia artist Charles Willson Peale, who had been a guest at Mount Vernon in 1772 while painting Washington's portrait, described how he and several other young men were on the lawn throwing an iron bar for sport when Washington appeared, and without bothering to remove his coat, took a turn, throwing it far, very far beyond our utmost limit. Washington's wealth and way of life, like his physique and horsemanship, were of great importance to large numbers of the men he led, and among many in Congress. The feeling was that if he, George Washington, who had so much, was willing to risk his all, however daunting the odds, then who were they to equivocate? That he was also serving without pay was widely taken as further evidence of the genuineness of his commitment. There were, to be sure, those in the ranks and among the local populace who had little fondness for Virginia planters and their high and mighty heirs, or who saw stunning incongruity in the cause of liberty being led by a slave master. It was also a matter of record that Washington had been retired from military life for 15 years, during which he had not even drilled a militia company. His only prior experience had been in backwoods warfare, a very different kind of warfare, and most notably in the Braddock campaign of 1755, which had been a disaster. He was by no means an experienced commander. He had never led an army in battle, never before commanded anything larger than a regiment, and never had he directed a siege. Washington was quite aware of his limitations. In formal acceptance of the new command, on June 16, 1775, standing at his place in Congress, he had addressed John Hancock. "I am truly sensible of the high honor done me in this appointment, yet I feel great distress from a consciousness that my abilities and military experience may not be equal to the extensive and important trust. However, as the Congress desire it, I will enter upon the momentous duty and exert every power I possess in their service and for the support of the glorious cause." He knew he might not succeed, and he gave Congress fair warning. "But lest some unlucky event should happen unfavorable to my reputation, I beg it may be remembered by every gentleman in the room that I this day declare with the utmost sincerity, I do not think myself equal to the command I am honored with." To his wife Martha he wrote that far from seeking this appointment, I have used every endeavor in my power to avoid it, not only from my unwillingness to part with you and the family, but from a consciousness of its being a trust too great for my capacity. It has been a kind of destiny that has thrown me upon this service. Yet he had attended Congress in his splendid blue and buff uniform, conspicuously signaling a readiness to take command. If he saw the responsibility as too great for his ability, it was because he had a realistic idea of how immense that responsibility would be. For such a trust to lead an undisciplined, poorly armed volunteer force of farmers and tradesmen against the best trained, best equipped, most formidable military force on earth, and with so much riding on the outcome, was, in reality, more than any man was qualified for. But he knew also that someone had to take command, and however impossible the task and the odds, he knew he was better suited than any of the others Congress might have in mind. Without question, Congress had made the right choice, and not the least of reasons was political. As a Virginian, Washington represented the richest, most populous of the 13 colonies. He himself had had years of political experience in the Virginia legislature and as a member of the Continental Congress. It was as one of them that the members of Congress knew him best and respected him, not as a general. He knew the ways of politics and factious politicians. He understood how the system worked. For all the delays and frustrations, however severe the tests of patience he was to suffer in his dealings with them and the system, he never forgot that Congress held the ultimate power, that he, the commander-in-chief, was the servant of some 56 delegates who, in far-off Philadelphia, unlike Parliament, met in secrecy. In the first days of September, Washington began drawing up plans for two bold moves. He had decided to carry the war into Canada with a surprise attack on the British at Quebec. 1,000 men from the ranks, longing for action, volunteered at once. Led by an aggressive Connecticut colonel named Benedict Arnold, they were to advance on Quebec across the Maine wilderness, taking a northeastern route up the Kennebec River. Hastily conceived, this secret expedition was based on too little knowledge of the terrain, but in small units the men began marching off to Newburyport, north of Boston. From there they would sail by sloop and schooner to the mouth of the Kennebec. He felt he could detach 1,000 troops this way, Washington informed Congress, because he had concluded from intelligence gathered from spies and British deserters that the enemy in Boston had no intention of launching an attack until they were reinforced. His second plan was to end the waiting and strike at Boston, which it was understood could mean destruction of the town. British defenses were formidable. In fact, defenses on both sides had been strengthened to the point where many believed neither army would dare attack the other. Also, a siege, by definition, required a great deal of prolonged standing still and waiting. But standing still and waiting were not the way to win a war, and not in Washington's nature. The inactive state we lie in is exceedingly disagreeable, he had confided to his brother John. He wanted a speedy finish, to fight and be done with it. No danger is to be considered when put in competition with the magnitude of the cause, he had asserted earlier in a letter to the governor of Rhode Island. According to his instructions from Congress, he was to take no action of consequence until advising with his council of war. And thus a meeting was scheduled for the morning of September 11th to know, he informed his generals, whether in your judgments we cannot make a successful attack upon the troops in Boston by means of boats. On September 10th, mutiny broke out among the Pennsylvania riflemen after several of the worst troublemakers had been confined to the guardhouse. Though the mutiny was put down at once by General Greene and a large detachment of Rhode Island troops, it only added to the sense of an army coming apart, and Washington was visibly shaken. The Council of War convened in his office as scheduled the next morning. 3 major generals, including the venerable Israel Putnam, and 4 brigadiers. All were New Englanders, but one Major General Charles Lee, who was Washington's second in command and the only professional soldier present. A former British officer and veteran of the French and Indian War, Lee, like Washington, had fought in the ill-fated Braddock Campaign and later settled in Virginia. He was a spare, odd-looking man with a long, hooked nose and dark, bony face. Rough in manner, rough of speech, he had nothing of Washington's dignity. Even in uniform, he looked perpetually unkempt